Midwest Whitetail is brought to you by Realtree, Hoyt Archery, Muddy Outdoors, Fuse Accessories, Trophy Rock, Frigid Forage, Scott Archery, Cabela's, Rocket Broadheads, Woods Zero-Turn Mowers, Bloodsport Arrows, Redneck Hunting Blinds, Scentmaster, Yeti Coolers, TrailCamPro.com, ScentLock, and Nikon.
Well, it's March 14th and we're ready to shed hunt again. Actually, we had a quick walk this morning. Carson found an antler that we know on my farm from a year ago, and we're getting ready to head back into Bill's farm here. We're gonna hit those same fingers and those same side hills that we hit a couple weeks ago, but at that time there was still quite a bit of snow on the ground, so we didn't really get in the timber. We didn't get up on any of the north slopes or any of those things that basically had snow on them yet. So we've got about 5 guys from Wisconsin. Me and 2 guys from the office, Greg and Tanner, are here, so we're gonna see what we can do today. Who knows, maybe we'll find a surprise out here today. That's the hope, so onward. A couple weeks ago, right before the Iowa Deer Classic, Eric Barber came down, and Eric's never found an antler, and I hear him whooping and hollering. And right on the bank of this creek, right here, he found the side of that big four-point side from that big 8-pointer Bill was hunting all fall. And it was the only antler we found that day, but it's been the biggest antler we picked up on the farm this spring. So let's find the other side. It's hot, we're torn up, cut up, thick nasty thorns, and we haven't even found an antler here yet. You know, it used to be fun to shed hunt Bill's farm. We used to find antlers everywhere. It's becoming a losing proposition, I think. You know, Bill's got a theory and a plan for everything. I would love to see Bill's shed hunting technique. That's what I'd like to see.
This is where I do my shed hunting. The dogs, for whatever reason, are the true bone collectors around here. You can see bones from years past, little bits and pieces, little chunk of a jawbone. Every once in a while there'll be a deer antler in this pile too. So they're up to 5 now, this being the 5th one. We'll show you the other 4. And I'm certain that if I had to walk whatever distance they're covering, I wouldn't have found any of these, but they've got this shed hunting down to a science now. So this is all I got to do. Every once in a while, grab my cup of coffee, walk down to the little bone pile, and see if there's any fresh antlers in there.
That is about what I would figure for Bill's shed hunting. The only thing that surprised me is I'm surprised he didn't drive his zero-turn mower down to the bone pile to pick up the sheds that the dog found. Well, forget that. We're going to pick up some sheds the old-fashioned way. We're going to earn them.
Mike just came up with a really exciting find. This is a deer that Bill called Big Junior. We had a lot of pictures of him, I think, in the summer, and then he kind of fell off the radar into November. That's a deer that Bill really wanted to pass on this year and see him get to 5. And as you can tell, it's a heck of a deer. He's got good mass, pretty good tine length. Big Junior, 4-year-old here, will be 5 next year, and probably on the top of the hit list.
That Bill hunted called Big. that devil, man, no, he don't have a prayer. She loves me like Jesus does.
Well, it's day 2. We got together last night. We had a nice little campfire. It was a beautiful night here in southern Iowa. And we're getting ready to hit the woods again. You guys ready?
Yes.
Whoa, we're ready. Let's go. We're wrapping up the big shed hunting weekend here, our second big trip out on Bill's farm, and we walked some more of my stuff this weekend. Probably the big find of the weekend was the antler from Big Junior that my brother Mike found over on Bill's bottom and some tall CRP along the bean field. But that's a great find. That's good news because that's a deer that was missing that has been missing in action for quite a while here off of Bill's farm. They hadn't seen it since November, I don't think. And then while we were walking my small farm today, my brother Mike picked up the 5-point side from that lopsided 11-pointer that I actually shot low on earlier in the season. So I think we came up with 19 antlers today. As we've said a number of times, the numbers are way down, but we still had a great time. Unless anything big comes up, the big shed hunts for 2014 are just about in the books.
Shed hunting is always a lot of fun on our farm, but if you go back to the, I'd say mid to late 2000s, early 2010s, just a few years ago, it was a lot more fun because the piles that we would find were just that much bigger. So that brings us to the thought of, do we need more deer? And obviously we've talked about this quite a bit. We're going to cover it in a little bit more depth throughout the rest of this episode. But there's only so many deer that a piece of property can carry. Do we feel like we're below that level? It was a heyday back in the 2000s. I mean, there was a lot of deer around here, a lot of bucks. We'd go shed hunting, we'd come back with a pile of antlers that might be 75, 80 antlers in one pile from a long weekend of shed hunting. It's not anything like that anymore. So again, is it practical to try to get back to that point? And that's one of the discussions that we're going to have here in this next segment with Jeremy Flinn. We're going to talk about what is the optimal deer density.
Yeah, I mean, so what we did just a basic winter trail camera survey, and if we looked at our main points or our main demographics that we looked at were population estimate, which we got about 90 deer per square mile. We had a buck to doe ratio of about 1 buck to 1.25 does, and then we broke down our individual age classes of the bucks, and then we saw about 43% in the ones, close to 30% in the twos, 19% in the threes, and then 4 and older we saw about 10%. So those were the main things that we looked at when we broke these things out as part of the survey. And
then when I look at those numbers as a landowner and a deer manager, I'm seeing maybe something behind the numbers that because of the experience I've got on the farm that you wouldn't have seen just on the strict survey side. One thing that I would say, and Greg Clements and I talked about it a little bit, was the number of deer per square mile is probably going to be a little bit skewed because we've got a lot of food here,
right.
And you're shooting this survey in January, so we're going to be picking up a lot of deer that maybe weren't living here during the season. I think we were probably, if I would have had to have guessed just based on my experience with, hunting a lot of different places, I would have thought we were in the 70 to 75 deer per square mile range in the fall. So, we're not far off from where I thought we were anyway.
Right.
The thing that people obviously want to know, and I always kick it around too, is how many deer can I support here in a quality way, keeping those deer healthy, making sure that we're doing everything we can by the deer from that standpoint, but also being careful that I don't overrun my neighbors or the guy who's cash renting my farm with depredation.
And I think you probably couldn't support those hive numbers if you also didn't do what you're doing with the natural habitat. We just talked about how much TSI work's being done and how much native browse, and especially at this part of the year, even with standing crops and food plots out there, they're really looking for that native habitat, native browse, and the amount of TSI work that's been done to the property creates so much food And that's a big asset that the property has going into the wintertime.
Right, and there's no doubt about it. We'll dig into a lot more TSI topics as the Midwest Whitetail off season goes on, because there's so many things to talk about there that can benefit you as a hunter. Okay, so the browse is on a higher plane probably than what we've got on a lot of properties. There's the food that we leave, which, you know, in non-drought years is going to be quite a substantial amount of food.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, on this farm, the 90 to 100 deer per square mile would be a target for me. You know, we're not there, I don't believe, because, you know, I like I say, I don't think we had deer to that number here.
Right.
We were pulling some in with the survey. Okay, so most people can't support that many deer because the farmers aren't going to go along with it.
Right.
The neighbors aren't going to go along with it. You know, a lot of different directions it can go because there's so many factors influencing density. We talked a little bit on this farm about the fact that, you know, my human carrying capacity, you know, the amount of crop damage, you know, that sort of thing, really more crop damage than anything else here, is going to dictate how many deer that we can effectively carry. In other areas, it's going to be based on the carrying capacity of the land itself. How many deer can you feed and keep healthy? What do you see? Like, let's just take a real quick cross section of management settings. Let's just take a typical Midwestern setting, you know, your Iowa, your Illinois, your Missouri, your southern Minnesota, your southern Wisconsin, kind of these core, what you'd call maybe corn belt or cropland areas. What is a good target density?
Sure, and I'd say most of those places you're looking at anywhere between 60 to 70 deer per square mile. You know, those places that have the crop fields to support it, they've got naturally really fertile soils. So the native habitat, whatever they're producing, is high quality as well. You're able to carry more deer without doing a whole lot of extra effort. Like this property, you obviously are going above and beyond that. So just naturally, they're going to be able to carry between 60 and 70 deer per square mile in those areas.
Right. Now let's take a more woodland setting, like a northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, a lot of the Pennsylvania, the stuff that you run into, this, you know, the kind of the classic big woods.
You're going to be down close to 20 deer per square mile, or even less in some areas. You know, a lot of those big wood settings have gone through because there hasn't been a whole lot of cutting, and there's not a whole lot of browse for the deer, which, you know, besides the acorns in the fall, they're relying solely on the browse. And when they don't have that in the wintertime, you know, they're needing to cut back to closer to 10 deer per square mile because the food's just not there. And that's where you get a lot of those areas in the big woods like Michigan and even Minnesota, where they have the winter feeding grounds, is because the natural habitat can't support that amount of deer, even though it is 20 deer per square mile, a third of what it is in most of the Midwest places.
Right. What's the most you've ever seen where it was carried I would say in a healthy way, like the highest density? I know the highest I've ever seen is in the neighborhood of about 150 deer per square mile. I'm sure there are parks that go higher, but it can't be healthy.
No, and once you get to that 100 deer per square mile, you're probably pushing the biological carrying capacity to where you can carry deer for that long. But what tends to happen is the populations are fluctuating because certain parts of the habitat are being permanently damaged to where they can't recover. And that's the kind of fringe that we basically play off of, is we don't want to get to the point where it can carry it, but we're damaging the habitat that won't ever recover. We want it to be able to support them and then bounce back once we hit spring green up and there's additional crops and things like that around.
Okay, good. Okay, based on all the stuff that we've talked about here with, you know, what's the optimal density, you know, what is the carrying capacity of the habitat versus the, if you want to call it, the socio-economic carrying capacity, you know, what the crop depredation and the neighboring farmers will tolerate. I believe that our fall density, I think we're pretty low compared to where I'd really like to be. So that's one step now, is going to be slowly bringing that number back up again. You don't want to make that knee-jerk reaction and just don't shoot any does, and then your population makes this big spike, and then you got to get on top of it and really press down again. What you really want is to ease it up. And we'll talk about that, you know, as we come into the fall episodes. You know, we'll take another look and we'll really discuss how many does we're trying to kill on this farm to make that sort of, you know, soft growth. Well, that's it for this week. I'm going to keep checking the bone pile to see what the dogs bring up. But we'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Midwest Whitetail. And remember to always dream big.